very precarious position in this country. We need a political change, but we also need the resolve to resist. Hey, thanks for watching our live stream. I'm the host, David Crayd, and I'll be back in about 10 minutes with the show. In the meantime, have a look at some of these clips and take the opportunity, please, to like this broadcast, ring the bell, or subscribe.
And we're stepping up in every way we can, because we know that Russia must win this war. Sorry, that Ukraine must win this war against Russia.
Go down the list of things that Justin Trudeau disapproves of, and you can imagine all of the things that will be criminalized. That someone who spent the first half of his adult life as a practicing racist, who dressed up in hideous racist costumes so many times he says he can't remember them all, should then be the arbiter on what constitutes hate.
I did not call people who were unvaccinated names.
The Prime Minister lied, and his minions continue to lie.
For everything you did, thank you to put your life on the line for us. You're one of the greatest women I've ever met in my life.
A lot of people would say that you're simply taking a page out of the Donald Trump book.
Which people would say that?
Well, I'm sure a great many Canadians, but...
Like who?
I don't know who. But
we feel, because you all will have implants, and we measure your brain waves, and I can immediately tell you how the people react, or I can feel how the people react to your answers.
Oh, no, Mr. Bond. I expect you to be chipped.
I'm a liberal and a proud socialist, Mr. Speaker.
This is a Manchurian Candidate. For people who don't understand the expression, I'm not talking about the movie. I'm referring to somebody who can be used as a useful idiot by another country to come out and spout these things off. He is a Marxist.
End your silence. Speak up. For God's sake, stop complying. Start rebelling. They're out to get you if you do not resist.
Good buddy, mercy's sake alive. Looks like we got us a convoy.
Canadian country singer Paul Brandt here. I've been listening with my wife and 2 kids, and we want to say thank you for all you're doing in defense of civil liberties and freedom.
I'll ask the question I posed to you at the start of my round. Will you apologize on behalf of the government for this outrageous invite?
And
stand by the invitation.
Of course, what I said in my initial.
You have no shame.
What? Oh my heavens!
There is nothing they fear like the crystal clear sound of someone somewhere telling the truth.
So it will be a world integrating the physical, biological, and the digital dimensions. So it will be a new world.
Stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. Because I can tell you, you cannot comply your way out of a tyranny.
Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. I would say it's plain to see that the racket has been going from strength to strength ever since. In his farewell address to the American people in 1961, outgoing President and old soldier Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about the threat posed by what he was already able to identify as the military-industrial complex.
These are all small countries today. They're much like the Greek city-states in the age of the Roman Empire. We're a sort of declining Rome at this point. I hope Americans will figure that out and act against it, but we're a declining Rome. The European states are like the little Greek city-states that were entirely dependent upon Roman military power to save them from the Macedonians. This whole business is a sham. NATO is probably not going to survive.
From the Public Health Agency of Canada did not have the science to support this policy. So the government initiated a study with a guy named David Fisman at the University of Toronto. And this study was so bad, Madam Speaker, that there's a book called Fisman's Fraud, The Rise of Canadian Hate Science, and I just want to know how much money did they spend on these studies to support this Arrive scam when they knew that they didn't have the science to even support it from day one?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, the mega conservative far right is coming out. These are the anti, these are the ones that still deny the pandemic. And at the end of the day, thank goodness it was that Canadians and the majority of the people in the House saw the value of protecting the health and well-being of Canadians, and that the far right was marginalized back then, Madam Speaker, because as a direct result, more people are living today.
When did you and your government start to become so afraid of your own citizens?
The Online Harms Act. You heard about it? Well, I've got some bad news for you. It is aimed at your free speech.
Thank God for truckers.
They are so terrified that we, the people, may make what they think is the wrong choice. That in the name of protecting democracy and saving us from ourselves, they're actually destroying our democracy and taking away our freedom.
This is the worst assault on freedom of expression ever in Canadian history.
Donc le but, c'était de faire une pression économique, empêcher de faire.
So the goal was to put economic pressure on these people to stop them from buying groceries, paying into their health insurance, and get them out of the streets.
Not the characterization that I would put on it. The objective was to ensure that those who were funding the continued illegal blockade of this and other cities were no longer able to do so.
Okay. Donc vous n'avez pas répondu à ma question.
So you didn't answer my first question. In which other democratic country is it possible to do that?
Democratically passed legislation in this country pursuant to the Emergencies Act in Canada.
Okay, donc vous avez fait le droit là. Vous vous êtes inspiré de la Corée du Nord.
So what, were you inspired by North Korea for this?
No. I'm not going to respond to that type of question, Madam Chair.
No, mais
He's calling them domestic terrorists and wants to freeze their bank accounts. This has been absolutely outrageous. And everybody now is starting to agree that Justin Trudeau has lost this fight.
There will be consequences.
Justin Trudeau, though, this week said something I hated, which he called out. He said, the world we're starting to see the rise, the growth of authoritarianism and totalitarianism and dictatorships. And I couldn't believe that he said this with a straight face. Listen.
In all of our democracies, in every democracy around the world, we are seeing a rising movements of either authoritarian populism or skepticism about democracy itself. And we all need to recommit ourselves to standing up, not just for Ukraine, but through standing up for Ukraine, to the very principles that make our countries strong and free.
So Justin Trudeau says these comments almost, he says them with a straight face, as if he doesn't realize what's happening in his own country being led by him to clamp down on freedoms, the authoritarianism that he is presiding over in Canada.
Biden mourned Navalny's death. Even in prison, he was a powerful voice for the truth, he said. An interesting statement while journalist Julian Assange, who published Truth Inconvenient to the US and the West, presently rots in Belmarsh prison as he fights extradition to the US. I'm not yet aware of Biden mentioning, far less lamenting, the death in a Ukrainian prison of US citizen and writer Gonzalo Lira, who was critical of the Zelensky regime. Biden's administration has sought determinedly to jail his and their strongest and most popular opponent, Donald Trump. And yet, in the immediate aftermath of Navalny's death, Biden highlighted Vladimir Putin's desperate attempts to stamp out the opposition. Zelensky propped up...
Well, I'm going to cut this a little short today because we've got to get a little bit of news in before question period starts. And I want to make sure I have enough time to speak with you. Thank you for joining on Friday. I don't always do Friday because there's literally half the people are there. everybody goes back to their constituencies on Thursday afternoon, especially if you live outside of Ontario. So we'll see what happens today, but I just wanted to catch up on a few news stories. I haven't talked about this all week, actually, and this is Kristen Frith, one of the partners in the GC Strategies, which was so intimately involved in the Arrive scam or ArriveCAN app, is actually been hauled before the House of Commons in a committee of the whole. And the offices of GC Strategies were searched by the RCMP, but they said it had nothing to do with the ArriveCAN. Go figure. I have no idea. But if this is happening, and if their offices are being searched, you watch if these two aren't going to be held out to dry by the Liberal government and the blame for all this. Yeah, they made some money off it, but justice might be coming. So we will see. Major story. Before I forget, though, buy our stickers. You can get them in the store. This is one of our favorites. You got to have these. You can put them, well, not everywhere, but within reason. It's a way of explaining how you feel about things today. It's a way of exhibiting, demonstrating your deep frustration with the Trudeau government. We all share that. I'm sure all of you listening today are sharing that. So have a look at this. But the story of the day, and this broke last night on the Globe. Yeah, and this is quite interesting because obviously there's always undercurrents in the Liberal caucus and the Liberal cabinet against Justin Trudeau. This is Liberal history. Liberal tradition is to quietly take the knives out when the leader becomes unpopular, get rid of him, and have a leadership convention very, very shortly thereafter. This is what happened to Jean Chrétien. He didn't want to leave. And Paul Martin engineered his departure literally a couple of years before it happened. And as it came closer to Jean Chrétien leaving, Paul Martin upped the ante and increased pressure, and that's what happened. And that's how they get rid of him. Of course, Paul Martin didn't last very long. But the Liberals think, hey, we'll put a guy like Dominic LeBlanc in there and we'll stay in power for another 4 to 5 years. Yeah, right. We will see. Canadians are not just angry with Trudeau, they're angry with the Trudeau government. Let's have a look at this story briefly, and I'll have to cut the question period.
Dominic LeBlanc is responding to a column in the Globe and Mail that reported he's considering a run to replace Justin Trudeau as leader of the Liberal Party. It was a surprising report because LeBlanc is known as one of the Prime Minister's closest friends and allies, but it was also detailed in laying out that a meeting took place, a decision was taken at that meeting to start the groundwork for a bid to replace the Prime Minister. Today on Parliament Hill, CTV's Jordan Gowling asked the minister if the report was true.
Do you plan to run for Liberal leader?
No, I plan to be a candidate in the next election under Prime Minister Trudeau's leadership. I'm very happy. I'm excited about that. I'm focused on the responsibilities he gave me. It's a big job. I'm enjoying it, and I'm optimistic that our team and the Prime Minister will make the case to Canadians as to why we should be re-elected.
Have you been having discussions, though, about a potential run in the near future?
I've answered that.
Do you think the Prime Minister should resign?
So you are not organizing, sir, correct?
So that's the word, sort of, from Public Safety and Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Has he thrown enough cold water on the story to assuage suspicions, or could a Liberal leadership challenge be in the works?
Obviously, a Liberal leadership challenge could be in the works, probably is in the works, because Chrétien's popularity has reached levels where this is necessitated. The Liberal Party is above all in terms of its internal leadership. If in fact not with its external leadership, it's very, shall we say, rational in its assessment of what is possible. And they know they're going to lose the next election under Trudeau. They hope by getting rid of Trudeau, they're going to get rid of all their troubles. I say that's not going to happen because the government itself is too woke, too extremist. There's too many idiots in the cabinet, too many extremists in the cabinet, that just getting rid of Trudeau is not going to be enough. And Dominic LeBlanc, Yeah, he comes across sometimes like he's actually thinking, unlike most of the people in the front bench and the second bench who come across like they're just reading a script and couldn't think to save their lives. But no, Dominic LeBlanc is not going to save the Liberal Party from extinction, or at least defeat in the next election. So that is typical. But we're going to go to question period any minute here. I just wanted to, before I forget, I encourage you to read my human events column. And it's about how America has become a police state. Well, Canada is not far behind. But the first installment is about how many police forces, how many paramilitary organizations, how many security groups the United States is right now employing. People who can come to your doorstep in full combat gear with assault rifles, arrest you like you are a rapist or a murderer or a terrorist or a drug kingpin. I mean, there are innumerable groups. Well, they're not innumerable, but there's at least a dozen. And they, in the second part of this series, will deal with the intelligence agencies in the United States. 18 of them. 18. Count them. How many intelligence agencies does any country need? I mean, this is absolutely outrageous. Here we go to question period.
More evidence of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister that is just not worth the cost. Former bank governor and proud Liberal David Dodge says the new federal budget certainly is not helpful to dealing with the inflationary fire, making it harder for Canadians' families to afford anything. Young people saddled with this Prime Minister's addiction to spending. The call is coming from inside of the Liberal House. Will the Prime Minister listen to experts, to business leader, to his own party, and millions of Canadians struggling to get by and just stop the spending?
Stop it. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The lowest debt and deficit in the G7, Madam Speaker, a AAA credit rating, and a budget that presents a message of fairness for this country, fairness for current and future generations, a vision that they would cut. They already, before even reading the budget, said that they would not support it. That is a budget that supports childcare, that supports pharmacare, and understanding that Canadians have to have dental care in this country. Canadians who can't otherwise afford it will have the support of this government, and that more homes be built, Madam Speaker. That is vital in this country, and they're standing against every single one of those.
Good answer.
That's pretty feeble, eh, folks? Pretty
Speaker,
feeble.
The problem is that nobody believes them anymore, and this budget is the opposite of fairness. It is unfair to saddle our kids with billions of dollars of debt that they'll be paying for years. It is unfair to force the inflationary spending onto grocery bills of every single family. It is unfair to keep interest rates high while millions struggle to pay their mortgages. The number of Canadians who can't afford to pay their bills has more than doubled over the last month. So will the Liberals finally fix the budget so Canadians can keep their homes, put gas in their cars, and put food on their table?
Now, will there be a single question today about Trudeau's leadership?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker,
a great opportunity.
The opposition and the Conservative Party seem to be good at posing for photo ops and pretending to care about people in food bank lineups, while our government has introduced the most comprehensive package of competition reforms in Canadian history to increase competition and bring down grocery prices. But how cruel and heartless do you have to be as a party to vote against feeding kids in school?
Shame.
And that party over there has voted once already against the National School Food Program, and we've introduced it in Budget 2024, and we're going to see them vote.
Member for Thornhill.
Hey, Jacko, how heartless do you have to be to starve Canadians?
That member, the speakers, Madam Speaker, the spending spree just isn't limited to the costly government photo ops that he's talking about. He's been here for 9 years. The Liberal insiders and elites are the ones getting in on the action too. We learned this week that the RCMP raided the home of a guy who grifted $20 million of taxpayers for the ArriveCAN app. The Prime Minister failed to get the money back. This House ordered it. So will someone over there tell their boss to get the cash back?
Right. The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, as I said yesterday in the House, our government takes the use of taxpayers' money extremely seriously. We welcome investigations.
Hey, there's the next Liberal leader right there,
Madam Speaker, that are taking place, including the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that, as is well known, publicly raided a residence earlier this week. Madam Speaker, we've said anybody who abused taxpayers' money will face the consequences, and of course, we will seek to recuperate all money that has been misallocated.
That's right.
L'honorable député de Beauce.
The honourable member for Beauce.
Yeah.
Madam Speaker, after
There's
9
Dominic.
years of this Prime Minister who's not worth the cost, our farmers are crying out in large numbers this morning in Beauce to express their anger at a government that's completely out of touch with reality. Our farmers are being asked to fill our pantries while the Bloc Liberal coalition is blocking passage of Bill C-234, which would remove the carbon tax on propane and natural gas used to heat buildings and dry grain in order to lower food prices. Will the Prime Minister and the Bloc use common sense and say yes to this request from Canadian farmers? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. I find it strange that a member for Quebec would ask this question about C-234 because it won't apply to Quebec. But last
Maybe he's
week,
thinking about Canada.
they had an opportunity to prioritize this bill, but what did they do? They switched it with a different bill. So they have to walk the talk, Madam Speaker. He should convince his colleagues to move forward on C-234.
Now, why do you suppose a Conservative MP from Quebec would be concerned about Canada, not just Quebec? Well, these people are so incredibly dense.
Beauce. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This answer just proves how out of touch this government is. I invite the government and the Bloc to go to Beauce today and tell farmers that the carbon tax doesn't apply in Quebec. I've got room in my car after question period. No farmers, no food, Madam Speaker. Something the Bloc Liberal coalition just doesn't get. The Bloc wants to radically increase the carbon tax again, proving once again that a vote for the Bloc will cost you dearly. When will the government finally pass Bill C-234 in its original form, Madam Speaker? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I don't know why it's a member for Quebec who's asking this question.
There he goes again.
Because the bill will have no impact on Quebec. I would understand if it was coming from a member from Ontario. This member needs to convince his colleagues to move forward with C-234.
This is identity politics
They have
again.
that opportunity. They had the opportunity, but
They
2 or 3
can't
times
even get this
they swapped it out for something else. That's not our fault. That's their fault.
Who's
The honourable
more
member for
incredibly
Manitowoc.
dense?
Madam Speaker,
This
yesterday
guy or
my
his
colleague
boss,
for Drummond
Macaulay?
read the minister page 83 of the 2024 budget, which reads, expanding access to halal mortgages. The minister replied, no, we want to limit it. We just want to explore it, look at it, see if there's anything we can do. And besides, it's private. It's not a government program. In short, a great amount of unease. If they don't know where they're going with their halal mortgages, if it's not up to the government, if they want to frame it rather than expand it, what's it doing in the budget?
Hey, they all talk like AI robot. Yes. Sometimes I wonder if they're not. Oh, here's Ms. Islamophobia. Yeah, the one who's such a devout Muslim, she's not wearing the hijab or anything else.
Within private companies. And
That's
that's
a
why
joke.
the government is now announcing to consult with financial service providers and diverse communities to understand how federal policies can protect Canadians from abuses. And I hope that
And
all
supports
parties across
policies
aisles
of the
can
Liberal
get on
government,
board
woke
with this to make
policies
sure
that no
Canadians
Muslim would
in this
support.
financial
And none of
times,
the
in these
Muslims
economic
I
times,
do,
are protected.
I know, do support.
The
Just
honourable
total
member for
farcical.
Manitowoc. Madam
Totally
Speaker,
farcical.
we may have a partial answer. Over the past few months, the media have been reporting dissatisfaction among members of the Muslim community with certain positions taken by the Liberal government. According to Radio-Canada, a Muslim group even threatened to cut off the Liberal Party's funding of $680,000. That would mean they're leaving the Liberals for the NDP and the Conservatives. The Liberal solution, as always, is to pander. Are halal mortgages in the budget an olive branch extended to a fringe of the Muslim community? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, I think the Bloc is going off the rails a little bit. They don't know where they're heading with this. They don't want to vote in favor of the budget.
Almost 3 o'clock,
even though there's
Pablo.
good things in it for Quebec.
It's
there's
getting
a whole
there.
bunch of things that are important to Quebecers. So they don't want to talk about those things because they know it's
relief
good
is
for
close,
Quebecers,
Pablo.
but it's not good for the Bloc.
Dans un commentaire, excuse, the honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Pay your bills, or buy your groceries. That's the dilemma for too many Canadians. Big oil and gas are doing just fine by gouging Canadians at the pumps and making record profits. Why? Because this government
because of the carbon tax that you support, Lisa Marie
instead of making big oil pay what they owe. And don't expect better from Conservatives because they're focused on taking Canadians' dental care and free medication. Why is this government letting ultra-rich CEOs rip off Canadians?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
These dippers
By
are
eliminating
pathetic.
inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, Madam Speaker, by eliminating or introducing rather a tax on share buybacks. There's other examples I could give, but this government has presented a vision that says to the corporate sector and the oil and gas sector that they have responsibilities from it.
I want to know if these jokers, these liberal jokers, are going to support Charlie Angus's private members bill that will make it illegal, criminalize promotion of fossil fuels or the fossil fuel industry. Are these clowns going to support that private members bill? I want to know. I'm going to start asking.
Speaker, and just as New Democrats have delivered social programs to help Canadians,
get
the
out of
Conservatives are already campaigning to cut dental care and pharmacare, and it is absolutely shameful. People are drowning in debt just to keep up.
Shameful how you support the Liberal government every day.
In record profits.
That's what's shameful,
Liberals and
Matthew.
Conservatives don't have the courage to challenge the status quo because it benefits them and their insider crony friends. Madam Speaker, New Democrats want to tackle corporate greed. Why won't this?
You believe the hypocrisy of these NDP MPs? They prop up this government every day and don't want to even be held accountable for doing that or even admit they do that. Anyway, I think this speaker here, this deputy speaker, is emulating the speaker we all don't like at all.
That member now for a number of years talk about, yes, the issues that he's also raised, but a vision on the environment, which I'm wondering where exactly the NDP is on these days. Carbon pricing is vital to this country's future. It really reflects an approach of responsibility from an environment policy perspective that I thought they stood for, but they're wavering, they're flip-flopping, and I sympathize, as others do, with the NDP. It's a very difficult time. They have tough decisions to make, but I hope that they end up on the right side of history with this issue, Madam Speaker. I really do.
Honourable Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakesborough.
Speaker, gas prices are the highest they've been in
Steve,
years. In my Ontario
thank you for
community,
mentioning
prices
that,
are
because
as
this
high
guy
as
is
$1.80 a
completely
litre.
nuts.
Sadly, the Prime Minister
I
gave
don't mean
relief
Kyle
to
Rittenhouse.
Canadians
I
and
mean
increased
Matthew
the carbon
Green.
tax by
Completely
23%.
nuts.
Worse, when the carbon tax quadruples, it will add 61 cents to the price of a litre of gas. It's clear the Prime Minister is not worth the cost, as Canadians work twice as hard to take in half as much. When will the Prime Minister axe the tax so Canadians can afford to get to work, get groceries?
Yes, I followed Kyle Rittenhouse very closely.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, what's baffling listening to the members from the side opposite is that they're not listening to economists from across this country. Last week it was about 200 economists. Now it's over 300, it's about 350 economists have written to us an open letter saying specifically that most families receive more in rebates
How
than
much
they
are you
pay in
paying
carbon
them?
pricing. In other words, the policy is designed to ensure it does not raise the cost of living for most Canadians. And they say climate change, on the other hand, poses a real threat to Canadians'
Oh,
economic
economists know
well-being.
all about that. Those are just like the intelligence experts who said that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation.
$80 a litre for gasoline now. The Prime Minister could reduce the price of a litre of gas by 20 cents right now by axing the carbon tax. Speaker, the Liberals have out-of-control spending and Canadians are broke. Rents, mortgages are doubling. Inflation through the roof. We spend more money to service the debt than we do transfers to the provinces on healthcare. Canadians are tapped out, Speaker. They're seeing no relief from this government. So when will the Prime Minister do the right thing? Call a carbon tax election.
Do it today. Gave us 18 more months of these losers.
The former Conservative Prime Minister of UK, Boris Johnson, came to Canada to teach the Conservative Party a lesson about the dangers of climate change denial nonsense. He said voters continue to care deeply about the environment. They want solutions that are going to be cost effective. Madam Speaker, we agree, and both the PBO and over 350 economists agree that the price the carbon pricing and the rebates will help 8 out of 10 Canadians better off. The Conservatives' only plan, Madam Speaker, is to let the planet burn. Their chief insult.
Listen to this clown. Yeah, we should listen to Boris Johnson. The guy who looked like he crawled to that conference last
He
week.
should listen to the answer, and he shouldn't be heckling.
Absolutely.
And some of his colleagues were heckling as well. So I
Not
would just
even
ask
worth
members to please tone
contemplating.
down and listen to the
Boris
questions
Johnson
and the
is
answers
such
that are
a
being posed.
joker.
The honour member for Calgary,
Such
Nose
a
Hill.
beneath
Madam Speaker,
contempt
after 9
individual.
years, Canada's emissions are rising, and the Liberal carbon tax is making life unaffordable. On April the 1st, the NDP Liberals
Michelle.
increased the carbon tax, and across the country today, Canadians are paying way more at the pumps. Many Canadians who have been struggling to pay their bills throughout the cold and dark winter, who might have been planning a summer road trip, might not be able to afford it now. Why are the NDP Liberals giving Canadians a cruel summer instead of axing the tax?
I used to have a lot of time for Michelle to
The
really
Honourable
back the
Parliamentary
wrong
Secretary.
horse in the
I think it's
Conservative
important that we
leadership
be
campaign.
clear. Under the previous Conservative government, ambitions were on the way up with no plan to bring them down. We are on track to meet our 2026 targets. We are on track to meet the Paris targets. We are taking the action needed to reduce emissions. But more than that, if we're going to talk about affordability, let's talk about an economist from Calgary who said carbon pricing is definitely not to blame for affordability challenges. Again, I'm going to listen to the economists.
The honour
You
member for
keep
Calgary,
listening to
Nose
your
Hill.
bought and paid for economists.
I choose to listen to the people in my riding who are paying 20 cents more a litre because of the NDP Liberal carbon tax. An inconvenient truth for the Liberals is that the only time that emissions went down in Canada was under Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government. In fact, if they want to listen to someone, they should listen to a fellow Liberal, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, who after losing a by-election said the carbon tax is wrong. Tens of millions of Canadians agree. These are the people we listen to. Why don't these NDP Liberals?
Because they're dense.
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
They're
Mr.
blinded by
Speaker,
ideology.
If the member opposite is concerned about the price of gas in Alberta, may want to speak to the Premier, who on April 1st increased the Alberta gas tax. And by the way, that's not connected to a rebate. Our federal carbon price backstop pays more to 8 out of 10 Canadians than they actually pay in carbon pricing. But the Premier's gas tax, that was just an add-on.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Madam Speaker, 40% debt to GDP, the metric the finance minister used just last year as her anchor that she's now cut loose. $40 billion more in debt last year, $40 billion more debt projected this fiscal year, $40 billion debt projected the following fiscal year. I sense a pattern. After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, Canadians are being asked to hold the line at 40 something, but there's no real plan for that. Will the Prime Minister tell Canadians under 40 how much of their future he's blown?
Climate ideology is a cancer sucking the life out of Canada.
Opposite is a
Right
graduate of the
on,
Ivy School
Brenda.
of Business in my riding, Madam Speaker. He knows economics, so he knows, of course, that Canada has the lowest debt to GDP ratio.
It has the highest.
In the G7, and that GDP
They keep
debt to
repeating
GDP
this
ratio
line.
is set to continue to come down. But what he's really saying by raising these issues is that they don't stand in favor of a vision of fairness for this country. One of child care, farmer care, dental care, and building more homes. The national school food program that my colleague mentioned before is also vital to that vision. They stand against all of it.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre, and I want to ask members not to
Canada
be
has the
heckling.
highest debt to GDP
Madam Speaker, it
ratio.
appears that member didn't get the memo, but what's causing inflation in Canada is actually deficits, and the Bank of Canada governor said so. The interest cost to service Canada's growing debt has risen to over $54 billion, doubling in the last few years. It's now more than what we spend on healthcare. This is a cascade of debt obligations, and there is no plan to reverse it. This NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister advise why he continues a fiscal course that will saddle young Canadians with sky-high debt for years?
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
40
Now
more
I really
billion
have to question
dollars.
the member's understanding of economics, Madam Speaker. I thought he knew, but I wonder now. Inflation is a global phenomenon, and in Canada, in fact, it's declining. What I would say is back to that member. What is he going to do when it comes to voting on the budget? Is he going to stand declare an intention to support childcare in this country, to make sure that we have a vision of fairness so that kids can go to school with their bellies full, so we can have dental care in this country, pharmacare, all these things. He's against it.
The honourable member for Joliette. Madam Speaker, in their
No,
budgets, the
time-
Liberals
time
like
for
to
the block.
illustrate their measures with concrete
You don't need to
examples
listen
of
to the block. So your comments today are all excellent, by the way. Well, just about. I always appreciate knowing how you folks are thinking, what you're feeling, because it's important. This is half the reason we do these live broadcasts. It's just not to hear me spout off. Certainly not to hear half of these clowns in the clown show spout off, but so you can liaise with each other and you can let known what your opinions are about these important issues. I think this is very, very important. So it's interesting. We've got a debate going here about whether we should have a two-party system or we should have a multi-party system beyond the NDP, the Bloc, and the Green and the PCP. I to tell you the truth, I don't know at the moment what my preference is. I know it's not working the way it is. We need more direct democracy. More direct democracy. We need more referenda. We need more initiative. We need more recall. We need more direct democracy. It's not working right now with this representational system as it is. Clearly, that's where I stand in this. So you can take that for what it's worth. I worked in this system for almost a decade in this House of Commons. I know it inside out. I know how corrupt it is, and I know ultimately a lot of these people are self-serving, and the party system prevents them from really standing up for constituents at times. Anyway.
Housing, accelerated
Put you back to Pablo here.
construction, the construction
He's
of
always got
affordable
something silly
housing,
to say.
helping young families in need, helping young families, young couples get access to property. And the Bloc is today saying that's important, but they're voting against everything we're doing. The Conservatives have so much influence over the Bloc that they keep voting along with them. It's shameful.
Honour member for Yellowhead.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government has hit Canadians with another carbon tax increase of 23%. Grocery prices are climbing, making families choose between heating and eating. Conservatives tried to ease this burden by passing Bill C-234, which axes the tax on farmers. But this week, the Liberals blocked it. They are hell-bent on making life more expensive. If they're so confident in their costly plan, will they let Canadians decide and call for a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'm Speaker. I want to be clear about the affordability piece to the way the carbon price works, because it's a carbon price and a carbon rebate. And I believe that the members opposite should be very clear with their constituents about whether they're asking the carbon rebates to not land in their bank accounts. Again, going back to what the economists state, an economist reviewed the carbon pricing and rebate system, said we estimate that the median annual net cost of carbon taxes for households in Ontario in 2023 was negative, meaning that most households received $300 more in rebates than they paid in carbon taxes.
The honourable member for Simcoe Grey.
Madam Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, they spend more servicing the national debt than on health care. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadian soldiers eat at food banks and veterans are living in their cars. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, seniors can't afford to eat and they can't afford to heat. After 9 years, Madam Speaker, despite deficit after deficit and record debt, the problems are getting worse. Canadians know the Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the NDP Liberal government admit they have a spending problem, not a revenue problem?
L'honorable ministre.
No, Minister.
Madam Speaker, that's a bit rich coming from the party opposite. Let's take a walk down memory lane. When they were in party, when the Conservative Party of Canada was in party under Stephen Harper, let's see what they did to veterans.
You mean in power, don't you?
They slashed the Veterans Affairs budget. They closed 9 Veterans Affairs offices, and also they cut the workforce by 1,000 individuals that provided direct services to veterans. Mr. Speaker, we'll take no lessons from the Conservative Party of Canada.
L'honorable député Shannon. Leamington.
Madam Speaker, after the release of the tax and spend budget this week, everyone knows that this NDP Liberal government, after 9 long years, and this Prime Minister are just not worth the cost. Bill C-234 was to provide some desperately needed relief for our farmers who produce food for Canadians. That bill passed this chamber. Then the Prime Minister bullied the senators into gutting that bill and leaving Canadians with higher costs. When will the Prime Minister call for a vote on the original motion or call a carbon tax election?
Yes, the way they treat our military is a disgrace.
Bill C-234 was so important in the Senate, then why 5 members of their own caucus didn't show up to vote? And by the way, they had the opportunity to debate C-234 when it comes back to the House. When we come back in 1 week, they traded 2 private members' bill. It wasn't C-234. So it's so important. I would advise my member of parliament or my colleague to lobby his particular colleagues and stop politicizing this issue.
They love to go after Harper. 9 years later.
No, member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Madam Speaker, this government's liberal inflationary policies have made everything more expensive. Gas has gone up so much, food is unaffordable, Canadians are hungry, and their housing is too expensive. The Canadian dream of owning a home is now out of reach for a generation of hardworking young adults. Madam Speaker, will a policy of $1 of savings for each $1 of new programs be implemented by this inflationary government? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We work hard every day to deliver for Canadians. Conservatives pretend to care. They've already said they'll vote
dragging your
against the
knuckles
budget this year. How cruel and heartless do you have to be to vote against feeding hungry kids?
Oh, didn't we hear that one already, Ryan?
Seniors the dental coverage they need to get
Did you
their
pick up
teeth
the wrong
fixed,
piece of
or
paper, maybe?
supporting people with disabilities with hundreds of dollars tax-free more per month, or building more child care spaces so parents can get
These
back
people
to
are
work,
just so
or providing
brain dead.
insulin to people living with diabetes. You can't vote against those things if you actually cared. They don't care.
This is the government that euthanizes Canadians.
Madam Speaker,
Do they
the
care?
Liberals should never have bought the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It threatens our climate and our coasts. And Canadian taxpayers are now on the hook for this government's irresponsible spending to the tune of $35 billion.
Why don't you vote against the Trudeau government if you think they're so irresponsible?
From environmentalists and
Laurel?
coastal Indigenous nations, instead choosing to be in the pocket of big oil and gas.
Like you're in the
Why
pocket
does
of
this
Justin
government
Trudeau.
keep backing big polluters when they know this pipeline is an environmental and economic disaster?
Like the NDP is a political disaster. Is that what you mean?
If Canada is to succeed, Madam Speaker, we know that we have to get our resources to market, and that's why the TMX pipeline is so important. But the member knows, or ought to know, that the government does not intend to be the long-term owner of the project. A divestment process will be initiated once the project is more advanced, de-risked, and essentially with consultations, and essentially when consultations with Indigenous peoples are completed. This is the vision that we've always laid out, and it's one that we'll stick to.
The honourable member for Nunavut.
In their budget on Thursday, the Liberals made a lot of announcements on housing, but they did not make the $600 million investment in the territories that Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon have been desperately asking for. When I go home, I'm told more heartbreaking stories of crumbling and overcrowded homes. Why won't the minister listen to the territorial premiers and give them the funding they need to address
Why
the
won't
housing
the
crisis?
NDP vote against the Trudeau government if you despise it so much? Let's pretend we're a critic
Madam
today.
Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her question. She's been a
thank you, my
strong
colleague.
advocate on housing across the Arctic and Northern
Yes,
regions.
we just love the NDP, don't we,
We're
Liberals?
the first government ever in history to have direct agreements with Indigenous governments to address their housing needs. We have invested billions of dollars, in fact, over $3 billion in housing across the territories in a number of ways to help increase the housing and ensure that people have housing that is affordable to them.
Climate change means more flooding events of increasing intensity and severity.
No, it doesn't.
Homeowners in areas prone to flooding, like those in parts of Pierrefonds in my riding hit by flooding in 2017 and
That guy's been there
2019,
forever.
worry about the rising cost of flood insurance. And that's if they're lucky enough to remain eligible
remember when this
for
guy
flood
had hair.
insurance coverage. Can the Minister of Emergency Preparedness tell this House how this
Oh,
week's budget is coming to the
softball
aid
lob.
of climate vulnerable
Lob it.
homeowners.
Lob the softball over.
The Honourable Minister
Thank
of
you so much
Emergency
for that
Preparedness.
question
Madam
and your work
Speaker,
on the
I want to
file.
thank the member for his very strong advocacy on flood protection. We know that the devastating impact that climate change is having on Canadians. Insurance companies are
Oh,
paying billions of dollars.
there's
and
that
those
disaster
costs are
of
being
a
passed
defense
on
minister.
Canadians, making it even more expensive to own homes. With the budget 2024,
The hero
we
of
are increasing our
Afghanistan
investments
speaks.
on national low-cost flood insurance program. Over the next year, we will work with the provinces and territories to put this program in place. And Madam Speaker, we will be there for Canadians when climate change impacts their lives. Thank you.
Honourable Member for
Oh,
St.
it
Albert.
hasn't
Edmonton.
impacted our life
Madam
yet.
Speaker,
I thought
this
you
week,
you
the
keep saying it's
RCMP
causing
raided the
forest
home of
fires.
The Prime Minister's top Arrive scammer, Christian Firth. The raid is connected to a proposal that Firth's GC
Give it to them,
Strategies
Michael.
sent to the Deputy Prime Minister and her former Chief of Staff, Jeremy Broadhurst. So, what communications did the Deputy Prime Minister and her office have with GC Strategies regarding a proposal that has led to an RCMP raid?
Well, it's got nothing to do with GC strategies and ad
Madam
scam or
Speaker,
Arrive
again,
scam.
just because my colleague on the other side of the aisle repeats something doesn't necessarily attach it to the facts. The facts, Madam Speaker.
What are
in
the
this
facts
case
with you,
are well
Dominic?
known.
Are you running?
The RCMP, the one thing that he said is it's entirely factual, is the RCMP are looking into this matter. And that's why I would urge people to be careful before they invent things and ascribe things to what is an ongoing police investigation. Our government has said that people have a responsibility to be judicious with taxpayers' money, and those that aren't will face the consequences.
Is that like your story
St.
about
Albert,
not
Edmonton.
wanting to
Madam
run against
Speaker,
Justin
the
Trudeau?
two-person basement company GC Strategies received more than $100 million from this NDP government, including $20 million for nothing on Arrive scam. We know of a link between GC Strategies and the Deputy Prime Minister and her office regarding a proposal that has led to an RCMP raid. So, has the Deputy Prime Minister been contacted by the RCMP, and will she fully cooperate with the police investigation?
It's got nothing to do with ArriveCAN.
Again, Madam Speaker, my friend on the other side simply asserts a series of things that he knows very well are not accurate and attempts to connect the series of dots that simply can't be connected.
Yeah, that's obvious.
He should stick to the basic facts. The RCMP, following information that was given to them by the Border Services Agency, has decided to look into a series of allegations. They obviously take their work very seriously, and we should allow Canada's National Police Force to do their work and not simply make up stuff in the House of Commons beside the
They
work.
take their work very seriously if the Trudeau government authorizes
Madam
them to
Speaker,
do that
after
work.
9 years of
and
this
not
Liberal
before.
NDP government, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost or the corruption. The ArriveCAN app was originally supposed to cost $80,000, only to skyrocket to $60 million, triggering an RCMP investigation. The contractor admitted to this House that he does not feel ashamed, and the Liberals have not even asked him to repay the money. Madam Speaker, when will the Prime Minister get Canadians their money back?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Madam Speaker, I had a chance earlier in today's question period to answer that question. I'm happy to do it again.
Oh,
Madam
are you?
Speaker,
I'm
our
glad you're
government
happy.
has worked with the Auditor General's office, with parliamentary committees. There's an internal investigation being conducted by the Border Services Agency. All of these investigations will, unlike some of our friends on the other side, establish the facts of what happened. Anybody who's misused taxpayers' money will be required to repay it, and anybody who has misused taxpayers' money will face the consequences. And that's why we're pleased that the RCMP are looking into this matter.
If they're looking into as much of the matter as you say so.
Speaker, this app went live 4 years ago in the early days of the pandemic and has been the subject of questioning and scrutiny ever since. While Canadians were losing their businesses and being told by this Prime Minister that we were all in this together, insiders at GC Strategies were milking taxpayers for millions of dollars. Madam Speaker, when will the Prime Minister get taxpayers their money back on Arrive scam?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, we have said continually, and we'll say it again, if people have misused taxpayers' money or have misappropriated public funds, of course efforts will be undertaken to recuperate that money.
Will be
That's what a
undertaken.
responsible government does. But a responsible government, Madam Speaker, allows the internal reviews and audits that are underway to determine exactly what money might be subject to the reimbursement and what's the appropriate process to have that money reimbursed.
Good point,
And
George.
at the same time, Madam Speaker, the RCMP are also looking into this matter.
Yeah, he's happy because he's going to
L'honorable
have
député
Trudeau's
Pierre
salary
The honourable
very
member
soon.
for Pierre Boucher Patriotes Verchères.
Very, very possible.
Madam Speaker, gas went up by 15 cents in one single shot on Thursday morning. It's highway
Quebec,
robbery.
of course,
And that's
yes.
not because of the carbon tax, which doesn't apply in Quebec and didn't change Thursday morning. Why did it actually happen? Because of these greedy oil companies. They're getting ready for
Oh.
summer by taking money out of people's pockets. Companies like Suncor and CNRL, which raked in $8 billion in profits last year, and yet they're being subsidized by the Liberals. Over 10 years, $83 billion.
No, Mark,
The
I
Liberals
despise
also
the
bought a
NDP.
$34 billion
I despise their
pipeline.
hypocrisy
Isn't it time to
most of
cut
all right
off
now,
the money for these oil
and the
companies?
fact that they have
The
nothing
Honourable
in
Parliamentary
common
Secretary.
with the people they pretend to represent.
Madam Speaker, the oil and gas sector has to pay its fair
Wow,
share. It's
that's a
bringing
long
in
comment.
record profits and needs to invest in reducing
Doreen?
emissions. We have eliminated inefficient subsidies to fossil fuels.
But we'll
And
put
we're
it up
asking
anyway.
the wealthiest 1% to pay a little more. The Conservatives are against our cap on oil and gas emissions. The Conservatives, in fact, are taking their marching orders from the oil and gas sector.
Look at that guy. He
Alors,
sits down and
l'honorable
laughs
député
because he knows it's
Order.
all a script.
The Honourable Member for Pierre
He
Boucher.
can't even
Patriotes
take
Verchères.
himself seriously.
Well, I think that the Liberals are going to have to tell us what an efficient subsidy to the oil and gas sector would even be. Now, the carbon tax doesn't apply in Quebec and has only a 0.15% impact on inflation. But Conservatives from Quebec are constantly weeping and wailing about it. Whereas when gas goes up by 15 cents due to their fossil fuel friends, they don't say a word. There's complete silence when the oil and gas companies take money out of Quebecers' pockets. Same thing when we say that the government should stop paying
Maybe you
fossil
should
fuel
just stop
companies.
driving a Xavier.
Does this government think that it's a good thing that they pay through the nose to these oil and gas
I think
companies?
it's a
and
bad
yet
thing that the
these
Bloc
companies make
Québécois
consumers
even
pay more?
sits in the House of Commons
The Honourable
because they're a
Parliamentary
waste
Secretary.
of space.
Madam Speaker, I'm glad we're hearing the truth from the Bloc Québécois, which is that the federal carbon tax, the federal carbon price does not apply in Quebec.
This is Guilbeault's
They should speak to
sidekick,
the Conservatives who don't seem to
Julie
understand this.
Dabroussin. This is Stephen
We
Guilbeault's
agree that
sidekick
all
here.
sectors of the
She's
economy
got
need
all
to
the
reduce
talking points
emissions,
memorized.
including oil and gas
She's
companies.
got the script down pat.
We are doing that work to ensure that
She
it
knows
happens.
all about how arson
The
has
Honourable
nothing
Member
to do with those forest
for-
fires. It's all climate change.
No, not the Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher Patriotes Verchères. I'm sorry.
L'honorable député de Montmagny-Lisley.
I'm sorry. I meant to say Montmagny-Lisley, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, Canadians are struggling to put food on the table.
Table.
Meanwhile, this
Tabor.
Prime Minister's ArriveCAN app has made the GC Strategies owners multimillionaires. Canadians could have gotten some answers about ArriveCAN this week, but instead the Prime Minister enforced silence and ignored
Well, you
Canadians'
should have asked more questions about it.
This is $60 million in taxpayer money, money that went into the pockets of millionaires. Will the PM give Canadians this wasted money back? The Honourable Minister of Transport. No, I'm sorry.
No.
Yes, trees and plants do need carbon dioxide.
No.
And the
L'honorable
Liberals
ministre.
and the NDP are too stupid to even remember that.
No, there's the Minister of Transport over here. I'm not the Minister of Transport. Now, Madam Speaker, thank you. As my colleague knows, it's simply not true that the government wasn't transparent.
Not true.
My colleague keeps saying that, but he knows it's not true. I've
Not
been
true.
working with parliamentary committees.
Not
We've
true.
been working with the Auditor General.
Are you being transparent about the Liberal leadership, Dominic?
We completely agree with the idea that all those who inappropriately receive taxpayer money will have to pay it back. And as my colleague knows, the RCMP is investigating this matter.
This guy is such a globalist.
The Honourable Member.
Not him, but Dominic.
Madam Speaker, at a time when Canadians are working so hard without being able to actually get appropriately compensated for their work, consultants involved in the ArriveCAN disaster received $60 million. That's taxpayer money. Taxpayer money that was wasted. And they got that money for doing no work. So Canadians have a simple question, and the answer should also be simple. When will the Prime Minister give taxpayers their money back? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Madam Speaker, as I said in English a few moments ago, my colleague knows that there's an inquiry happening at the CBSA, an internal inquiry, and it's for that exact purpose, to find out whether money was spent inappropriately. We're going to have to wait to understand what the facts are before asking for money to be paid back.
Brian, are you serious?
We understand Canadians' concerns about this.
$2.11 a liter
We
in
share
Vancouver
Canadians'
Island.
concerns
That's
about
where I
using
grew up.
taxpayer money appropriately.
I won't tell you what it used
Madam
to,
Speaker,
what
the
it
Prime
cost
Minister's
when I grew up.
ArriveCAN app was supposed to cost $80,000. The Prime Minister chose the app, mandated its use, and along with the NDP voted $60 million to fund it. Shady contractors got rich without doing any IT work, while the app itself failed and erroneously sent tens of thousands of Canadians into quarantine. The RCMP are knocking. The main contractors got $20 million. When will the Prime Minister get Canadians their money back?
L'honorable ministre.
Madam Speaker, the same question begets the same answer. We've said from the beginning,
excellent
the
answer.
government has welcomed the scrutiny of parliamentary committees, worked with the Auditor
Well,
General,
welcomed it?
and implemented her
I thought you
recommendations.
suffocated
My colleague,
the
Minister
scrutiny.
of Public Services and Procurement,
Almost
has
literally
changed the way
suffocated.
that these contracts are awarded and the oversight provisions. We'll continue to do what's necessary to ensure taxpayers' money is well spent, and we'll continue to obviously hold those to account that don't follow the rules.
L'honorable député de Ottawa-Vanier.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Nos vétérans et leurs familles.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier.
Anyway,
Madam Speaker,
here's
our
a
veterans and their
softball.
families have sacrificed a great deal for our country. We have a solemn, sacred duty to support our veterans who served with honor and courage. We know that it can be
That's something
difficult
the
for a
Liberals don't
veteran
know about.
transitioning to civilian life to access medical care. When they were in the armed forces, veterans received their health care from the forces directly. Can the Minister for Veterans tell us how she will help veterans and their family have access to these services?
Thank you for that question, and the members work on the
The
file.
Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my friend and colleague for her important question and her hard work for veterans in her community.
How did I know?
Budget 2024 will increase support to veterans and their families. Telemedicine services throughout the country will be offered to veterans and their families. That is one of the significant measures for veterans in this new budget. The pilot project has been a success. Broadening these programs will help veterans access healthcare during their transition to civilian life. Our government will always be there to support veterans and their families. Thank you.
You're never there to support veterans and their families.
Madam Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canada has entered uncharted territory. This
I'm a
government
veteran.
has made Canada a candy store for car thieves, and under their watch, organized crime has made Canada a key exporter of deadly fentanyl. Canadians and now the whole world know that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. This NDP Liberal government must take responsibility for this failure, which has brought crime,
love that
chaos, and
slogan,
corruption,
but it's
not
just so
only to
ineffective.
Canadian
It's
streets,
so
but
feeble.
the streets of the whole world. Perhaps is there a Liberal Party leadership candidate who can rise and tell us who's been running this place for the past 9 years so we can hold them to account?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I should
you,
say,
Madam
to you
Speaker,
folks
look,
listening,
fear mongering does nothing to encourage Canadians to have more confidence in our justice system. We have one of the safest countries in the entire world. We had an Ottawa summit just a few short months ago where we brought all of the different parties together. Since that time, you've seen an increase in the measures taken by police and other authorities across the country, including the federal government, and car theft is going down and recovering of stolen cars is going up. These measures continue to work, and we will continue to work with other levels of government and other necessary authorities. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
L'honorable député de Portneuf-Quartier.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Speaker, this Liberal government has been in power for 9 years.
9
We
years
all know
too
this,
many.
but I will repeat it. This government is not worth the cost. Montreal is turning into the Wild West. Criminals just don't care about authority. In fact, on Wednesday, some car thieves actually tried to run over police officers. Should that really be the case in a civilized country like Canada? Will the Prime Minister of this Liberal Bloc Québécois coalition,
And they probably
will
got
this Prime Minister finally put an end
get bail
to
for
these
anything,
lax crime policies
except for thought crimes.
and put these reoffending auto thieves in prison? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Put them in prison,
Madam
they'll get
Speaker,
bail and they'll be out.
One of the pieces of good news in the budget, of which there were many, and my colleague knows this very well, is that my colleague, the Minister of Justice, has committed to making amendments to the criminal code. Specifically for that purpose, to change penalties for car thieves. As my colleague is saying, we have had discussions with our essential partners to prevent auto theft, and we will continue to do all that is necessary to prevent this problem.
Prince George. Since 2016, over 40,000 Canadians have died from
That's
overdose.
rubbish.
Over $1 billion has been spent with zero results. BC's Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP has confirmed that organized crime is indeed trafficking safe supply. It's going straight from the pharmacy to the hands of criminals, unleashing crime, chaos, and disorder in our communities.
bet
After
it is.
9 years of this Prime Minister and his NDP servants, Canadians are finding out that they're not worth the cost. When will the Minister of Safe Supply take responsibility for her failed drug policies and put an end to taxpayer-funded drug?
You know, Canada right now
policies?
is like America in 1978, 79, when everybody thought the country was falling over
Thank
the
you, Madam
fiscal cliff
Speaker. We need all
and the social
partners
cliff.
working together to address the illegal toxic drug supply in our communities. We have and we will continue to support provinces and territories so that they can deliver the full suite resources that are needed. Our government will use every tool at our disposal to end this national public health crisis.
The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Madam Speaker, Canada's support for Ukraine has been unwavering. Unlike the Conservative Party opposite,
God's sake.
which has voted against Ukraine multiple times
Gerritsen,
now,
go
we
put
are
a
stepping up
paper
our
bag
support
over
through
your
Budget
head.
2024.
Maybe a plastic bag.
Can the
would be better.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development please tell this House about the important news for Ukraine through the latest budget?
Great, we're going to spend another $10 billion on
Secretary to the
Ukraine.
Minister
okay?
of International Development.
Our government has been there since day one for Ukraine.
Yes.
Budget 2024 is yet another step in making sure that
How much money are we
Ukraine
wasting?
wins in its fight against Putin's illegal invasion. This budget includes almost $3 billion in additional financing, including for lethal and non-lethal weapons,
$3
including
billion.
funding through the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development for the reconstruction of Ukraine, and we'll see how we can use seized Russian assets for the restoration of Ukraine. We have always been there to support Ukraine.
Yep, keep the money going down the black hole of Kiev into the pockets of the oligarchs and the corrupt politicians like Zelensky, so they can buy
The honourable member
nice yachts and
Churchill
mansions. What
Madam
a
Speaker, the
farce!
NDP successfully fought against cuts to Indigenous services, but it's clear the Liberals still don't get it. Let's look at housing and infrastructure, where the Liberals spent less than 1% of what First Nations need. First Nations here in...
Yeah, okay. I just want to comment on this comment. Look at the Coote scenario. 10 years in jail for a mischief charge. I really have been not looking at the story as closely as I need to. It's something has got to be said and done about this, because this is a national disgrace. And I'm going to look more into this story and do some research and some work on this file, because it needs to be done. Nobody is doing sufficient work on this story. Thank you for listening. Yeah. You really don't want to hear Patty, though, because she's just such a BS.
This file in 2015 from a previous Harper Conservatives who gave zero cares about the lives of Indigenous people. In fact, Budget 2024 dedicates over $9.5 billion to Indigenous priorities. A full 25% of the budget goes towards Indigenous priorities in this country. We'll continue on the path of reconciliation together.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Madam Speaker, in the midst of a climate crisis, the oil and gas industry raked in $38 billion in pure profit in 2022 by gouging Canadians at the pumps, fueling inflation. And despite claims of fairness in this year's budget, we learned this week that big oil's lobbyists convinced this government to shelve an excess profit tax on these record-breaking profits that could have generated $4.2 billion to help make life more affordable for regular Canadians. Can anyone in this government justify to Canadians what's fair about this?
What's fair about this?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would remind the member what I said earlier when the NDP posed the question on this issue. Introducing eliminating inefficient fossil fuel subsidies
There's
and
no
introducing
climate
a tax
crisis.
on share buybacks.
Read my
In addition,
lips.
changes to capital
No
gains
climate crisis.
that will benefit, on the whole, the vast majority of small businesses in this country by decreasing the inclusionary rate and increasing the lifetime capital gains exemption means that it's the largest corporations that will be asked to pay more to ensure a greater vision of fairness in the country.
And that brings us to the end of question period on this Friday. No. I have a point of order. The Honourable.
Anyway, that was very edifying today. Thank you for the viewership today. It was probably the highest all week, actually, I think. Don't ask me why. Friday is usually the worst example of question period, but thank you for watching today. It's always appreciated. I will be back on Monday with question period live. I'm going to try to do this every day unless I have to be elsewhere. And of course, it all ends in June anyway, right? So they're literally just a month and a half away, a little over a month and a half away from this ending for the summer. So it's good to get our licks in while we can. Thank you for being so aware of national issues. You're great people. I just love reading these comments. Thanks for liking the station. Please like the station early if you can, or do it now. Subscribe if you haven't. Resubscribe if you must. I ask you, I really appreciate your support. We're going to hit 30,000 subscribers in another couple of months. That's my goal. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think we can do that. But we can with your support. Tell your friends and family to get involved in the station. I think this is a station unlike a lot of others because I don't feed you BS or clickbait. I don't tell you things that aren't true just so you'll tune in. I've spent most of my life doing this job as a journalist, as a public affairs officer, as somebody who knows this business inside out. So I didn't come here because I decided I was going to make a quick buck on the internet, on YouTube, or something else. I came here because I wanted to do independent journalism after years of being told how to do it. So it's a relief to be here. Thanks for watching today. And I'll probably have a broadcast on over the weekend, at least one. But if you haven't had a chance, watch my interview yesterday that I put up with Kamel El-Sheikh. He is a common sense Muslim man who knows what this country needs. And that's less gender ideology, in fact, no gender ideology, and less indoctrination of our children by this extremist community that has taken over our schools and our school boards and our governments. So please have a listen if you haven't already. It's a good interview, and it's being suppressed. Yes, it's being suppressed because they don't want that. It's okay to go on the air and say, oh, we all hate Trudeau. Trudeau's a nutcase. Trudeau's crazy. And it's over for Justin Trudeau. YouTube doesn't mind that. But when you get into specifics, you get into policy matters, they don't like that. So thanks for watching today. I will be back with Question Period live on Monday. And I'm going to put at least one broadcast out today. Thank you so much. We love you.